The lake never cared for borders. It lapped gently against my family's land the same way it did against the new luxury villas rising next door. But people love borders. They build fences, gates, and paper empires to claim what was never truly theirs. And none loved borders more than Karen Whitmore, president of the Lakeview Serenity HOA. She was a vision of suburban tyranny, hair sprayed into an unyielding helmet, designer sunglasses perched on her nose, clipboard clutched like a royal scepter. She didn't walk, she marched, as if the earth itself needed her approval with every step. I first met her on a crisp spring morning, standing at the old Thornton gate like she owned it. "Mr. Thornton, we need to talk," she said, smiling with all the warmth of a cold steel trap. "The HOA board is offering you a very generous buyout. Your parcel is critical to the expansion of Lakeview Serenity. You'll be doing the community a great service by selling." Her gaze drifted past me, surveying the 15-acre stretch of my family's land, the same land my grandfather had cleared, the same dock my father had built with his bare hands. To her, it was just another line on a developer's blueprint. To me, it was blood, sweat, and heritage. "No thanks," I said flatly, leaning against the gatepost. "Not for sale." Karen's smile tightened. "I don't think you understand. The board has voted unanimously. Your land as well. Frankly, it's an eyesore. It disrupts the uniform aesthetic we're cultivating. A natural lakefront promenade would elevate property values for everyone, including you." "Appreciate the concern," I replied, tipping my hat. "But this land isn't going anywhere, and neither am I." Her lips pressed into a thin line. The woman wasn't used to hearing no, especially not from someone she considered a relic of a bygone era. Karen liked control. HOA bylaws were her commandments, and the residents bowed to her edicts. But I wasn't under her thumb, and that gnawed at her. "You'll regret this, Mr. Thornton," she said, voice dripping with veiled threat. "Change is inevitable. You can choose to be part of it or be left behind." As she spun on her heels and marched back to her golf cart, I had a nagging feeling she wasn't finished. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat, not when she could twist rules, weaponize ordinances, and suffocate people with paperwork. For the next few weeks, small skirmishes broke out. Karen began sending me courtesy notices, thinly veiled ultimatums citing imaginary infractions. My old boathouse was suddenly labeled a hazardous structure. The wooden dock grandfathered in by county records decades ago was deemed non-compliant. The ancient oak tree near my driveway, obstructing community sight lines, it was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Neighbors whispered about Karen's obsession. Some pitied me. Others were too afraid to cross her, fearing they'd be the next target. But I stood firm. I'd dealt with bigger bullies than Karen Whitmore. Then came the day the notices stopped. I knew that didn't mean she'd given up. It meant she was preparing for a bigger move. It arrived one gray morning in the form of flashing red and blue lights. I had just stepped onto my porch with a fresh cup of coffee when the county sheriff's cruiser rolled up to my gate. Standing beside it, in a crisp blazer and that same clipboard, was Karen. She looked like a general surveying a battlefield she believed was already won. "Mr. Thornton," the deputy called, stepping out of the cruiser, "we're here on reports of multiple code violations and safety complaints filed by the Lakeview Serenity HOA." Karen didn't hide her satisfaction. She approached slowly, savoring the moment. "This is a formal request for compliance, Mr. Thornton. Failure to address these violations will result in legal action. And frankly, eminent domain is on the table. The county has an interest in seeing this land properly developed." I didn't blink. "Eminent domain, huh? That's quite a leap from generous offer." Karen's grin widened. "I warned you, change is inevitable." The deputy shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware of the game being played but bound by protocol. "Jake, they've filed enough paperwork to warrant an inspection." "My hands are tied." Karen tilted her head, oozing mock sympathy. "Of course, if you reconsider the HOA's offer, we can make all this go away. A win-win, don't you think?" I took a step forward, rolling up my sleeve as I did. The coiled serpent tattoo on my shoulder glinted under the dull morning light. Karen's eyes narrowed. For a flicker of a second, her facade cracked. She didn't know it yet, but she had just declared war. The sheriff's visit wasn't a warning. It was Karen's opening salvo. She wasn't interested in fair deals or neighborly chats. She wanted control. And when people like Karen Whitmore want control, they don't ask. They conquer over the next week. She launched a full-scale offensive. First came the HOA compliance officers. They showed up in pairs, clipboard in one hand, camera in the other, circling my property like vultures. They measured fence posts, photographed the boathouse, even poked at my drainage ditch, mumbling about environmental runoff hazards. Every morning I found fresh violation notices tacked to my gate. One day it was the dock unsafe and dilapidated. The next it was the gravel driveway non-conforming surface. They even cited me for unauthorized agricultural activity because I had a vegetable patch. Karen's strategy was clear. Paper me into submission. But I'd faced worse in my life. Bureaucratic harassment wasn't going to break me. If anything, it sharpened my resolve. Still, I knew I couldn't win this war by ignoring her. Karen thrived on silence. It let her control the narrative. So, I made a few calls. The first was to Eddie Malone, a retired county clerk and an old friend of my father's. Eddie still knew his way around property records. Over a pot of black coffee, he pulled out dusty file boxes and unearthed the original Thornton easement agreements, ironclad documents that predated the HOA by half a century. They detailed access rights, land use permissions, and, most importantly, a clause exempting Thornton land from any third-party zoning restrictions. In legal terms, it was a silver bullet, but I wasn't done. The second call was to Lori Martinez, a reporter from the county paper. She had a nose for stories involving small-town power trips and overreaching HOAs. When I laid out Karen's campaign, her eyes lit up. This isn't just a land dispute, Jake. It's a takedown waiting to happen. The following weekend, Lori stood on my dock with a camera crew interviewing me as the lake sparkled behind us. I'm not against development, I told her, speaking calmly into the mic. But no one, especially not a self-appointed HOA queen, is going to strong-arm me off land my family has owned for generations. Karen's name came up often, along with phrases like abuse of authority and targeted harassment. Lori was relentless. By Monday, the story hit the front page. Veteran landowner battles HOA's illegal land grab. Karen's reaction was swift. 2 unmarked SUVs parked near my gate the next morning. Out stepped Karen, flanked by her legal advisor and a man I recognized as the county zoning commissioner. She wasn't smiling this time. "Mr. Thornton," she said, tone clipped, "this media circus you've created is damaging to the community. You're making this personal." "You made it personal, Karen," I replied, holding up a fresh stack of violation notices. "I'm just making it public." She turned to the zoning commissioner. "Explain to Mr. Thornton the county's stance on non-compliance." He cleared his throat, glancing at the cameras now discreetly positioned by Lori's crew. "With reviewing the situation, given recent documentation provided regarding easement rights, certain enforcement actions may need to be reconsidered." Translation: Karen's legal footing had crumbled, but she wasn't retreating. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You think a tattoo and a sob story will save you? I've buried bigger opponents, Mr. Thornton." I smiled, rolling up my sleeve once more, exposing the full coiled serpent wrapped around a combat dagger. "Isn't a sob story, Karen. This is a warning." For a fleeting second I saw genuine uncertainty in her eyes. Not fear, but hesitation. She wasn't used to resistance, especially not the kind that fought back with both facts and backbone. But Karen wasn't done scheming. As she left, her parting shot was icy. "Enjoy your moment, Mr. Thornton. The board always finds a way." That night, as the sun dipped behind the lake, I sat on my porch, documents spread before me, the hum of news alerts buzzing on my phone. Karen's assault was far from over. She'd tried the legal route and failed. I knew what came next would be more desperate and more dangerous, but so was I and the lake. The lake was watching it all, indifferent yet eternal. Karen Whitmore had lost the legal battle, but she wasn't the type to surrender. She thrived on control, and people like that don't walk away quietly, they escalate. The very next morning, a flatbed truck arrived, hauling metal barricades and orange cones. Men in safety vests began setting up along my driveway, hammering restricted access HOA construction zone signs into the gravel. I approached calmly. "What's all this?" A foreman, clearly uncomfortable, handed me a typed memo. "Directive from Lakeview Serenity HOA. Temporary closure of adjacent access for environmental remediation." "We're just following orders, sir." Orders from Karen. Blocking my driveway wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a message. Karen couldn't evict me, but she could make life unbearable. She was trying to fence me in, isolate me, choke off access until I cracked. But this time, I was ready. I pulled out my phone and made one call to Sheriff Dan Coulter, a man who'd served beside me years ago, back when problems were solved in deserts half a world away. Dan didn't care much for HOA politics, but he cared about land rights, and he had a long memory. Within an hour, his cruiser rolled up, lights flashing. "What's this circus, Jake?" Dan asked. "Eyeing the barricades," I explained, and his expression darkened. "That's a civil violation, not a criminal one. But here's the thing, hosts don't have jurisdiction to block public easements, not without county approval. And from what I see, they didn't get it." He stepped over to the foreman. "Pack it up now." Karen arrived minutes later, flustered and red-faced, marching up as if she still commanded the field. "Sheriff Coulter, this is HOA authorized work. You're overstepping." Dan didn't flinch. "Ma'am, you're the one overstepping. You block public access again, and I'll have no choice but to arrest you for obstruction." Karen's fury was barely contained. She spat out legal jargon, threats of lawsuits, but the barricades came down. As her contractors retreated, she turned to me, venom in her voice. "You think you've won. I don't lose, Mr. Thornton." But she already was losing, she just couldn't see it yet that evening. Lori's latest article hit the county's digital front page. HOA president caught in a legal blockade attempt on veterans' land. Social media erupted. Karen's name trended for all the wrong reasons, but the real blow came from an unexpected quarter. Eddie Malone, ever the quiet operator, had tipped off the State Land Rights Commission. Turns out, Karen's aggressive expansion plans hadn't just ruffled my feathers, they had violated state conservation easements that protected natural lakefront areas from commercial overdevelopment. The commission opened a formal inquiry. Karen's house of cards was trembling, but even cornered, she didn't stop. 2 days later, she made one last desperate move. I was working by the boathouse when a black SUV pulled into my lot. Out stepped a man in an expensive suit, flanked by 2 corporate types. He introduced himself as Victor Langley, CEO of the development firm funding Karen's Lake Villa project. "Mr. Thornton," he began, his tone oily smooth, "we understand there have been tensions. I'm here to make you an offer double the HOA's original bid. Cash, no strings attached. Let's put this unpleasantness behind us." I stared at him for a long moment. This wasn't negotiation, it was an attempted bribe to clean up Karen's mess. "You should have come yourself from the start, Langley," I said. "But it wouldn't have mattered. This land isn't for sale." His smile thinned. "You're being short-sighted. We can make things very comfortable for you. Or very complicated." There it was, the veiled threat. Corporate muscle dressed up in diplomacy. I took a deliberate step closer, letting my vest fall open. The coiled serpent tattoo on my shoulder was now fully visible. A silent badge of battles fought, lines defended. Victor's gaze dropped to the ink, and something in his eyes shifted. Recognition, calculation. He wasn't dealing with a stubborn farmer. He was facing a man who'd held his ground in far deadlier negotiations. "I think we're done here," I said, voice flat. He nodded curtly and left without another word. That evening, Karen's empire began to crack. County officials, under mounting public and legal pressure, froze the HOA's development project pending investigation. The homeowners once loyal to her regime began turning on her, fearing legal fallout and financial loss. Karen had underestimated the land. She had underestimated me, and now she was running out of moves. Karen Whitmore was a queen without a board. In just 2 weeks, her empire of bylaws and bullying had collapsed into a mess of investigations, lawsuits, and public outrage. But true to her nature, she wasn't going quietly. Karen was a fighter, but so was I. The difference: I knew when a battle was already lost. The final confrontation came on a sharp autumn morning. I was tightening a bolt on the dock when I heard the distinct crunch of tires on gravel. Karen's silver Range Rover eased to a stop by my gate. She stepped out slowly, but this time, the clipboard was gone. No entourage, no sunglasses to hide behind. Just Karen. Stripped of her armor, she stood there, silent, as if gathering herself. "I'm not here to fight, Mr. Thornton," she said at last, her voice low, worn down. "The board voted to dissolve the HOA this morning. I didn't say a word. I just listened. They've abandoned the Lake Villa project. Investors pulled out after the inquiries. The county's holding hearings next week. It's over." Her gaze drifted to the lake, the water calm, indifferent to her downfall. For the first time, she looked small. Not defeated, not humiliated, human. "I thought I could build something beautiful here," she said quietly. "Elevate the community." But I lost sight of where I was stepping. I crossed my arms, watching her. "You didn't lose sight, Karen. You ignored what was already here." She nodded, a bitter smile tugging at her lips. "I thought you'd gloat, rub it in." I shook my head. "No victory in that. You were never the enemy, Karen." "Agreed." Well, she exhaled sharply, a brittle laugh. "Guess we both learned something." For a moment, we stood in silence. 2 stubborn forces who had clashed until there was nothing left to fight over. But it wasn't over. Not yet. "I assume you're here for more than just a concession speech," I said. Karen reached into her jacket and pulled out a slim envelope. "Consider this an apology." Inside was a formal retraction letter, signed by the remaining HOA board members, acknowledging the Thornton family's historical rights to the land and relinquishing any HOA claims to adjacent properties. It was legally binding. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, "but I needed to give you closure. And maybe myself, too." That was as close to an olive branch as Karen Whitmore would ever offer. "I'll take it," I replied, pocketing the envelope. "But don't expect a lakefront promenade invite anytime soon." A faint smile crossed her face. "Fair enough." As she turned to leave, I couldn't help but admire her, if only for the fact that she had the guts to face the end of her reign head-on. Most people like Karen vanished when the power slipped away, but she stood on that gravel road, alone, and owned her defeat. The following week, the county formally dissolved Lakeview Serenity HOA. The development permits were revoked, and the land slated for the luxury villas was rezoned back to conservation status. The lake, as it always had, remained untouched. But the story didn't. Laurie Martinez's final article wasn't about Karen's fall, it was about resilience, about land, legacy, and the people who stand firm when the world tries to push them off their roots. Emails flooded in, messages of support, stories from other small landowners who had fought similar battles against overreaching HOAs and greedy developers. My story had become a rallying cry. But for me, it wasn't about public sentiment or viral headlines. It was about that morning silence by the lake, the kind my grandfather used to cherish, the kind my father had passed on to me. One crisp dawn, weeks after the dust had settled, I stood on the dock with a cup of coffee, watching the mist roll off the water. There was no more clipboard-wielding queen plotting her next move. Just the lake, just me. But I knew Karen wasn't gonna, not really. People like her don't disappear. They adapt. She might resurface in some other HOA in some other town, with fresh plans. But here, by this lake, her chapter was closed. I rolled up my sleeve, glancing at the coiled serpent on my shoulder, a symbol of vigilance, a reminder that some battles are never truly over, they just wait. As the sun broke over the tree line, I smiled. The land was safe. For now,